Okay, let's just jump right in because what we're talking about today is a full-blown rebellion. Not on some battlefield, though, but right in the heart of Hollywood. This is the incredible story of how four of the biggest stars on the entire planet risked absolutely everything to take on the system and change the movies forever. The inmates are taking over the asylum. Now, that's not some clever line from a script. That was the actual jaw on the floor reaction from a very powerful studio executive when he heard what was happening. And the so called inmates? Well, they just happened to be the most famous, most beloved, and, as it turns out, most powerful artists in the world. To really get why they did it, you have to picture the scene. It's 1919. Hollywood is basically a gold rush town. The movie business is exploding. But the artists, the actual people creating all that magic, they were trapped in what you could only call a gilded cage, treated like interchangeable cogs in the giant corporate machine. And that machine had a name, the star system. It was designed from the ground up to turn these creative geniuses into corporate assets. See, studios didn't just have contracts with their stars. For all intents and purposes, they owned them. They dictated every single film, they capped every salary, and they controlled every aspect of their public image. So, how did they keep that iron grip? Well, the studio bosses had a favorite weapon, a brutally effective tactic that kept everyone, from the stars to the theater owners, right in line. It was called block booking. And this slide just lays it out perfectly. It was a raw deal. Let's say you own a movie theater, right? And your audience is just clamoring to see the new Mary Pickford movie. Well, to get that one guaranteed hit, the studio would force you, and I mean force you, to buy a block of 20 other, well, let's just say less than stellar movies. It gave the studios total, unshakable power over what America got to watch. Now, this system was suffocating, but it was the devil they knew. It took one specific threat. A rumor of a corporate power play so big, so final, that it finally pushed these artists over the edge, from quiet frustration into open, secret rebellion. And that threat was a rumored merger. The two biggest studios at the time, Paramount and First National, were planning to join forces. The goal? To create a film trust that would have an absolute monopoly. For the stars, this was a nightmare. It meant their salaries would be capped for good, and whatever little creative freedom they had left would just vanish. Poof, gone. The writing was on the wall. If they didn't do something, and do it now, they'd just be well-paid employees for the rest of their lives. So the four biggest names in the business decided they had to beat the studios to the punch. So let's meet the rebels. First up, the incredible Mary Pickford. Yeah, they called her America's sweetheart, but don't let that fool you for a second. She wasn't just the most famous woman in the world. She was a brilliant, tough-as-nails producer who knew exactly what she was worth. Then you have Charlie Chaplin. I mean, what is there to say? He was so much more than a comedic genius. His character, the Tramp, was a true global icon, recognized and loved in literally every corner of the world. Joining them with Mary's husband, the one and only Douglas Fairbanks. This guy was the king of the adventure film, the charismatic, swashbuckling hero that audiences would line up around the block to see. And finally, there was the visionary director D.W. Griffith. Now, it's important to say his legacy is complicated and controversial for sure. But in terms of the craft of filmmaking, there's just no denying he practically invented the language of modern cinema itself. And here's what's so amazing. They moved with breathtaking speed. In January 1919, that merger threat becomes public. Just a couple of weeks later, the Big Four, as they were called, held a top-secret meeting at Fairbanks' house to plan their counterattack. And by February 5th, the papers were signed. United Artists was officially born. So there you have it. The inmates were now officially running the show. But this wasn't going to be just another studio. No, they designed a completely new kind of company, something built from the ground up to serve the artist, not the other way around. Okay, so this right here is the crucial point. This is the whole ballgame. United Artists wasn't going to produce films. It was going to distribute them for independent producers like, themselves. This meant they could finance and own their own work, they could keep their own profits, and they could have the one thing they craved more than anything: complete, total creative freedom. So how did the rest of Hollywood react? Well, they were stunned. They just couldn't believe that these artists could possibly understand the complex, global business of film distribution. The general consensus was that this little experiment would fail, and fail fast. They gave him a few months tops. And to be fair, the studio heads had a really good reason to be so confident, because United Artists was facing one massive, seemingly impossible hurdle: the number of movie theaters they actually owned. A big, fat zero. The big studio chains controlled all the screens, and you better believe they were determined to freeze these rebels out completely. And this right here set the stage for the ultimate showdown. On one side, you have the studios, with all the theaters, all the corporate muscle, and the entire system on their side. But our big four had an ultimate weapon, one the bosses just couldn't control: the audience. It all came down to this one single critical question. Was their star power alone enough to force the hands of the theater chains? Because if the public couldn't even find their movies, the whole revolution would be over before it even began. And the public's answer? It was immediate, it was overwhelming, and it was a resounding yes. People proved that they didn't care one bit who owned the building. They cared who was up there on the screen. Their love for these stars was the one thing the studios couldn't buy or control. And the proof was right there in the pictures. Early releases like Griffith's Broken Blossoms and Fairbanks' smash hit The Mark of Zorro were massive successes. Theaters that tried to boycott them were forced to give in when audiences just started demanding to see their favorite stars. The rebellion was actually working. The legacy of this one brave move is just immense. United Artists didn't just survive, it thrived for decades. It shattered the studio's monopoly, it proved that the creator, not the executive, was the real power in Hollywood, and it basically laid the foundation for every single independent filmmaker who ever came after. Which, of course, leaves us with a really fascinating question for our own time. Over a century later, in this age of giant streaming services and massive media conglomerates, where does that power really lie now? It makes you wonder, doesn't it, if the spirit of those four rebels is still out there, fighting for its independence.